What is the Tempest mystery and what effects will Tempest have on your units in Tempest Rising? Well, I am happy to say we got a lot of juicy new information from the latest gameplay footage and developers' comments. Not only will I explain the Tempest Charge and Tempest Overflow gameplay mechanics in this video, but we will also see new unit abilities like mine laying by the GDF's Comms rig, abilities of Tempest Dynasty's missile and assault gunner infantry units, as well as how a GDF's engineer captures their mobile refinery. There is also lots and lots of GDF base building, management and unit production to analyze. We have new Tempest Dynasty buildings and units to check out, particularly one that looks like their repair unit. And that, my fellow RTS fans, is just a fraction of all the details I have prepared for you in this fresh gameplay overview. There are more things we have yet to find out about, like doctrines, aerial units, intel resource and specialist units. So I hope to get into that in a future video, which will be linked up here and in the description as part of my growing Tempest Rising playlist. Now on to the very first thing I noticed in this new gameplay, in which developers took it easy on each other in a 1 vs 1 PvP match, so we could see lots of new stuff not shown or talked about before. Units, and especially infantry units, have some actual mass to them, so they do not start running at full speed as soon as you order them to move, but take a few steps before moving at their top speed. On top of that, later in the gameplay you can see them take different stances, like proning for example, or leaning left and right while shooting at their enemies. This does at times produce some funny effects, like their bullets coming out of their weapons at odd angles, but hopefully the developers will manage to iron that part out. I love the fact they included these movements, which give infantry a more believable look and feel. Another thing that can be noticed right at the start of the match is that in Tempest Rising there are no builder units, no dozers like in CNC Generals, but straight up drop-in construction with only the main drone delivery from the main base as the building is being finalized. It does however go up in stages and with its health actively filling up, meaning you can demolish it more easily while it is being constructed. Some might argue they would rather have construction vehicles, giving them more targets to harass the enemy player, especially in multiplayer. I personally don't find that kind of gameplay very entertaining, but if you do, please share your tactics in the comments. As for the starting units, we can see the GDF faction got 1 drone operator and 4 field scouts. This isn't unheard of in RTS games, to have a few basic units when starting a multiplayer match, but it is also not final here, as the developers mentioned themselves. One staple of RTS games from 20 and 30 years ago that isn't red exploding barrels, which this game does have by the way, are resource crates. We can see the GDF player collect them on his way to scout the enemy base, and each one holds exactly 1000 resources represented by the red dollar icon. The other icon, the blue one, is Intel, and I will talk about that later. If you are wondering why the dollar icon is red, well, that is because Tempest, the main resource in this game, is red. During this PvP gameplay, we got a lot more info about how Tempest works both as a resource and a game mechanic, and I will first tell you more about its former use. Tempest fields, from which resource collectors collect this resource, are an area of the map where the Tempest plant has its vines and pods. These vines are organic and regrow over time, but pods also ripen. This means two things. You can rush to harvest pods, but will gain less resources overall, and also reduce the speed at which new pods will grow on existing vines. These vines can also die off if no nearby pods are left. But if you wait, letting pods ripen, you will collect more resources from them, also giving vines more time to grow new pods in the parts of the fields you have cleared out. As the developers call it, there is a whole Tempest ecology in the game, and could this also mean there will be animals, mutants or aliens besides the plant life? We will find out soon enough. When it comes to GDF infantry units, we have yet to see them all in action, but in this gameplay footage, we at least got to see a lot of them in the build menu. There were a total of 8 infantry types, of which we already know and have seen footage of the Field Scout, Drone Operator and Grenadier in the previous gameplay footage I analyzed, link up here and in the description if you haven't seen that video before. In this gameplay footage, we will get to see the Engineer in action and also the Drone Mauler, Comms Officer and a yet unknown Melee infantry unit. He looks like the Riot Medic, but instead of a healing kit, he has a melee weapon of some sort, like an electrified baton, but just for fun let's call it a Dark Saber, but we'll get to that a bit later. Another staple of past Command & Conquer games, like Tiberian Sun for example, is present in Tempest Rising in the form of resource silos. This is a game mechanic some love, others hate, but I personally find it a great addition as you are forced to build additional silos for storing excess resources you stockpile, and this makes your economy more vulnerable to enemy attacks. We can see that the GDF faction has a building called Air Control Tower in its build menu, but it was not built in this match as it is part of the gameplay that has yet to be revealed. What we can learn from the info card is that not only does it have 2 pads for aircraft, probably helicopters, like we can see in this screenshot, but it also provides a comm buff in a small area around it. This buff boosts attack and move speed of nearby units and possibly even detects stealthed enemy units. One more game mechanic which is integral to these kinds of RTS games is soft and hard counters to units. We can see an example of a hard counter as the GDF scouts reach the Tempest Dynasty base and the Pillager flame tank starts roasting them instantly. A counter to the flame tank is obviously the Hunter tank we will see later on, and a counter to that will be probably the Tempest Dynasty's attack helicopter or artillery. I am more of a hard counters player, but do let me know your view on this topic in the comments. When it comes to the Intel resource, we know very little so far, but what we can notice in this new gameplay footage is that the GDF's building satellite uplink generates a small amount of Intel passively over time. Additionally, you can gain Intel by destroying units which are marked by your own unit's abilities or attacks. Even more interesting, we can discover by reading its tooltip that the satellite uplink building itself is probably upgradable with pods, and that it unlocks advanced units and support powers. I will talk about these a bit later, and we have already seen one used back in the first gameplay overview I did, linked up here and down in the description. As for those building upgrades called pods, there are Riot and Specialist pods. The first leads to unlocking combat control options. This sounds a bit vague, but I'm going to make an educated guess that it unlocks additional unit abilities, while the second is much clearer as it straight up unlocks more powerful units. Can we build both at the same time? Can't say for sure yet. One part of gameplay I am not a big fan of, which is obviously present in Tempest Rising, is the use of ramps and raised plateaus as base locations. This sets an artificial limit to base attacks with ground units, especially if the defender is a turtle player, and prevents large-scale attacks on enemy bases until you unlock air and artillery units or support powers. It creates funnels through which the attacker has to go through, and it also gives the defender a height advantage which directly influences unit line of sight and with that their line of fire, meaning use of scouts and drones will be key in successful base attacks. But considering you can't construct new structures very far from your existing buildings, it should be much harder for more defensive players to quickly block off all the entrances and exits. When it comes to GDF vehicles, they are produced out of the vehicle bay, along with additional resource harvesters. So far we can see 9 units listed in its menu, including the harvesters and the mobile command vehicle, which is unpacked into a new construction yard. We have already seen the Sentinel, Hunter tank, Comms Ring, Trebuchet and Scrambler in action during the previous gameplay I broke down in the video linked up here and below. In this video, we get to watch the Riot Van in action. It has the ability to carry infantry on board and has an anti-infantry cannon on top. Its ability is to deploy a suppression field which temporarily stuns enemy infantry. This basically makes it the GDF's hard counter to Tempest Dynasty infantry in my book. The one new vehicle in this lineup is the Shield Maiden, but the only thing I could find in this gameplay footage is its info card. It is a defensive support unit which uses a laser and it's most effective against enemy air units. Its two abilities are to make enemy missile units in a wide area around it fire more slowly, and it can place a short-lived repair turret. I cannot wait to see this in action. As for the dedicated repairing of these vehicles, the GDF faction has a whole building called the Repair Bay, and it is a requirement to actually be able to unlock the recruitment of MCB vehicles. While on the Tempest Dynasty side, there is a similar vehicle, this on wheels, and it has actually animated robotic arms coming from its sides, showing that it is in fact a repair vehicle. Even more clearly, you can see a repair visual effect on both the building and unit during this clip, and it can deploy into a defensive structure with a build radius. Now, as for the defensive buildings of the GDF, this gameplay provides us with an expanded overview. First, there are the sandbags, then concrete walls and gate, as well as a chain fence. As for the turrets, we have the Gatling, Grenade, Trebuchet, Haywire and Laser types. Gatling turret is anti-infantry and anti-air. Grenade is anti-infantry with an effect area damage type. Laser is an anti-vehicle and anti-air turret, just like the Haywire turret, but that last one can also mark targets so you gain intel when destroying them. Naturally, they all require power and can be built on top of existing walls, but do not require them. A very pronounced difference between the GDF and Tempest Dynasty factions is the way they gather Tempest. While GDF has the more standard refinery and harvester like you are used to from Command & Conquer, Tempest Dynasty has a sort of a mobile refinery which travels on its harvesters. They make up its wheels, so when the whole thing rolls up to a Tempest field, its wheels, being the actual harvesters, separate and collect Tempest, which they deposit at the main vehicle/building. It is a novel approach to harvesting, and the main vehicle is quite tanky, meaning it can take a lot of punishment from enemy units. It is here we get to see a GDF engineer actually take over one of Tempest Dynasty's mobile harvesters, meaning they do register as actual buildings rather than vehicles. This is a big downside for them, as it means you can easily lose them if you send them out far from your base to harvest Tempest. I'm not sure how this will play out once we get into multiplayer. So far it looks that players choosing the Tempest Dynasty faction will need to come up with totally new tactics. During this little skirmish, we could watch the GDF's Hunter tank run over infantry, and this is not news. But during other times in the match, we could also observe other vehicles not being able to run over infantry, like the Sentinel for example. Not even light infantry. While not even the tank was able to run over the Tempest Dynasty heavy infantry. This means there is a limit to how far you can push this anti-infantry tactic. Now I need to explain the Tempest Charge and Overflow gameplay mechanics in full. The first view of this we got from the last gameplay footage, when the GDF's Trebuchet artillery unit was leaving that red lightning effect wherever its shells landed, as we do this time. Now we can also see the GDF Sentinel units getting that effect after moving through a Tempest field. This is called Tempest Charge, and it can build up on mechanical units and reduce their combat performance, making them move and attack slower. Harvesters are entirely immune to the Tempest Charge effect, and infantry can pass through Tempest fields without harm and do not suffer any negative effects. If a unit is overcharged with too much Tempest, it goes into Tempest Overflow and gets damaged over time. On the other hand, units like Tempest Dynasty Assault Gunner and Volcanic Laser Tank actually gain increased attack speed if they are affected by Tempest Charge. Remember, infantry does not get affected by Tempest fields, meaning assault gunners get charged when hit by units like the Trebuchet, which creates this effect with their weapons. The Tempest Dynasty medium tank unit called Boar, for example, can be affected by Tempest Charge, but it is immune to Tempest Overflow effect. Additionally, the sensor array defense building of the Tempest Dynasty faction can build up Tempest Charge on enemy vehicles within its radius, almost like a good old Tesla coil from Red Alert. This Tempest effect adds another layer of gameplay and interaction with the main resource and between all the affected units. It basically takes Tiberium from the CNC franchise to a whole new level and might point us to what the third faction is going to be all about. There are two base building and defense gameplay points I wanted to talk about. The first is how when your base is at full power and the power bar is green, you're totally fine. But when it goes into red, your production speed for units is decreased, and you can fully see this in unit info cards when you want to build them as a red addition to unit build time. Going into the red means total shutdown of the base, including turrets and minimap. But this is where you can use the interface to help you out, because besides the repair and sell icons, we have the power icon, meaning you can selectively power down buildings and reduce the power drain while you wait for more power production buildings to come online, like this GDF Advanced Power Plant. Next, we can take a look at some of the abilities the developers showcased for us during this new gameplay footage. First, we have the GDF's Comms Ring vehicle going outside its base walls to plant a cluster of mines, which we can see a little bit of when they explode as the base gets attacked. During this attack, we can also see that it is unwise to add turrets directly onto walls, as after they are destroyed, that leaves an opening for enemy units to walk in. They can also shoot over the walls at any nearby units. The next ability we see used is some sort of a speed boost for the Tempest Dynasty missile infantry. They move faster from what I could see, but there was no difference in their fire rate, nor did the ability last long. What is also interesting to see here is how the missile infantry outranges the anti-infantry grenade turret by quite a long margin. But once infantry gets into its range, it's devastating to them, and the developers showcase this on purpose beautifully. After this, we get to see the drone Mauler, GDF's heavy infantry unit, which controls 2 drones and is able to stealth while standing still. It is an expensive unit, but apparently it packs quite the punch. Data core is another building necessary for unlocking such units, and it too, like the satellite uplink, produces the intel resource passively. Now, why do both of these say that they unlock support powers? I can guess each unlocks some of them, if this text isn't a leftover from a previous development build of the game. When it comes to Tempest Dynasty heavy hitting units, there is the Porcupine, a multiple launch rocket system which is a mobile artillery unit, raining rockets at long range but at the cost of a substantial reload time. While their heavy infantry is the assault gunner with its huge minigun and fast rate of fire. It can't be run over with tanks, and on top of that, as I mentioned previously, it has an ability to boost its attack when it is hit by Tempest ammo, as we saw here, and goes into Tempest Charge mode. A similar thing happens to the Voltaic laser tank as it gets Tempest charged during the duel with the GDF's Trebuchet. That unit is mostly anti-infantry and anti-building in its deployed artillery mode, while it can fight vehicles in its vehicle mode. Finally, at the end of the match, we get a few seconds of footage of the comms officer in combat and his marking ability, as well as the yet unnamed GDF infantry using that Darksaber looking weapon I mentioned, as well as a riot shield. Hopefully we get more info on these soon. If I have missed any detail, please let me know in the comments. Check out my other videos on RTS games, including more on Tempest Rising. Thank you for watching and happy gaming.